Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going political. We're going to be talking about politics, specifically how we choose our leaders.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, it should be. We're looking at this article about Larken Rose. Have you ever heard of him?
I have. Yeah, he's pretty outspoken.
Yeah, he's got some pretty strong opinions about how people participate in politics, especially when it comes to voting.
Oh, yeah, like that whole lesser evil thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He thinks that a lot of times we're not really choosing the candidate we believe in. We're just so afraid of the other guy that we pick whoever seems less risky, you know?
I can see that. Sometimes it feels like picking between, I don't know, two bad apples. You just hope you find the one that's slightly less rotten.
Yeah, and the article uses a really clear example, the 2020 U.S. presidential election. You know, think about it. A lot of folks who voted for Biden, it wasn't necessarily that they were super fired about his policies. They were more worried about what might happen if Trump got another 4 years.
Right, right. And on the flip side, you had people voting for Trump, not always because they loved everything he did, but because they just couldn't stomach the thought of another Democrat in the White House.
It was almost like this fear-driven thing,
Yeah.
you know? But it makes you wonder, if that's how we're making decisions, what does it say about the system itself?
Yeah. Are we really in control, or is it all just kind of predetermined? Rose actually uses a really powerful analogy to get this point across. Imagine you're forced to pick which of two people is going to rob you.
Oh, wow, I see where you're going with this.
The real problem isn't who you pick, right?
Yeah.
It's the fact that you're getting robbed at all.
So we're so caught up in picking between these two options, we don't even question why we're stuck in that situation to begin with.
Exactly. It's like we've been conditioned to accept that someone has to be in charge instead of asking why we need to be ruled at all. And, it makes you think about things like, I don't know, the deep state and all that.
That's kind of a loaded term, isn't it? But I guess it speaks to that idea that there are these unseen forces, these power structures, that are manipulating things behind the scenes, no matter who's officially in charge.
Yeah, yeah. It's like we're playing this game where the rules are rigged and we don't even realize it.
So even when we think we're voting for change, are we just perpetuating the same system? It makes you wonder, right? And Rose actually uses the example of Trump's presidency to dig into this.
Yeah, which is interesting because Trump was supposed to be this, this big disruptor, this outsider who's going to shake things up. But
Right,
then,
then what happened?
well, Rose points out that even though Trump presented himself as this sort of anti-establishment figure, a lot of his actions didn't really challenge the status quo all that much. He talks about how, for instance, Trump actually increased government spending, like significantly.
Which is kind of ironic, right? Because he campaigned on being this fiscal conservative.
Exactly. And then there's the case of Ross Ulbricht, the guy who founded this Silk Road website.
Yeah, the online marketplace, that was a pretty controversial thing. I remember that.
Well, he was sentenced to life in prison, and a lot of freedom advocates were hoping Trump would pardon him. But Trump kind of dragged his feet on it, waiting until it was politically convenient.
So it's like, was he really committed to freedom, or was it just about strategy?
That's the question Rose raises, and I think it's important to understand that he's not really trying to take sides here. He's not saying Trump was good or bad, or Democrats versus Republicans, or any of that.
So what's his point then?
He's trying to get us to look beyond the individual players and see the bigger system at work. He's saying that politicians, regardless of their party, often end up upholding the same basic structure of control and taxation. And, he talks about how we get so excited about these little victories like budget cuts and things.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like, we're so busy celebrating the fact that they're taking slightly less from us, we forget to ask why they're taking anything at all.
Yeah. And that's where Rose really starts to challenge our thinking. He says, instead of being happy with fewer whippings, so to speak, we should be questioning why we're being whipped in the first place.
It makes you think, doesn't it? It's a really provocative way to put it. And he goes even further. He even compares contemporary politics to what happened with dictators like Hitler and Stalin.
Yeah, he points out that those guys rose to power by exploiting existing problems and then presenting themselves as the only solution.
So they promised change, but then they just kind of continued the cycle of control.
Exactly. And Rose's big question is, are we doing the same thing today?
Are we just picking a new dictator every few years and calling it democracy?
Well, that's what he wants us to think about. And he has a pretty radical suggestion. He says we should stop playing the game altogether. We should stop participating in a system that treats us like subjects instead of free individuals.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement.
It is. And it leaves us with a lot to think about.
Like, what does that even look like? What are the alternatives?
That's the really interesting part. And we'll get into that right after the break.
So to just walk away from the whole system like that sounds pretty drastic. What does that even look like in practice? I mean, are we talking anarchy here?
Well, Rose doesn't actually lay out a step-by-step plan, and I think that's intentional. He's not trying to tell people exactly what to do.
More like a nudge in a certain direction.
Yeah, it's more about, sparking critical thinking and getting us to imagine different possibilities, things we might not have considered before.
So instead of giving us the answers, he's asking the right questions.
Exactly. He wants us to see that there might be ways to organize ourselves that don't involve this top-down power structure,
Yeah.
that maybe we don't have to accept the system as it is.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
But one thing I'm curious about, he keeps talking about true freedom. But what does he actually mean by that?
He describes it as a state where individuals are sovereign, where you're not constantly subject to the whims of some external authority.
So basically, being able to live your life according to your own values and principles without someone else dictating what you can and can't do.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have an inherent right to self-determination, that we don't need permission to be free.
Okay, I get that. But even in a free society, wouldn't you still need some kind of rules or systems? I mean, just to avoid chaos and ensure people can coexist peacefully.
Oh, absolutely. That's the tricky part, right? Figuring out how to balance individual freedom with the needs of society.
It's a tough one for sure.
Some people think we need a minimal government, just enough to provide basic services and protect individual rights, while others prefer more community-based solutions where people come together to make decisions collectively.
It sounds like there are lots of different ways to approach it.
Yeah, and Rose doesn't really endorse any specific model. His main point is that whatever system we create, it has to respect individual autonomy while also promoting harmony and cooperation.
Finding that sweet spot where we can live by our own values without stepping on other people's toes. It sounds like it would require a pretty massive shift in thinking.
Totally. We have to move beyond this, us versus them mentality, this left versus right, Democrat versus Republican kind of thinking.
We've got to open our minds to a broader spectrum of possibilities.
Exactly. It's about having honest conversations, being willing to listen to different perspectives, and figuring out what kind of society we actually want to build.
But let's be real here for a second. Is a truly free society even possible? Especially in the world we live in today, it feels kind of utopian, doesn't it?
That's a fair question, and Rose acknowledges that it's a long shot. But he also says we shouldn't just accept the limitations of the current system as inevitable.
So don't lose hope just yet.
Yeah, there might be a better way, even if we don't have all the answers right now. The important thing is to keep searching, to keep experimenting, and to learn from our mistakes along the way.
So it's not about reaching some perfect endpoint. It's more of an ongoing process.
Exactly. It's about constantly striving to create something better, even if we know we might never fully get there.
It's a journey, not a destination. I like that. And, reading this article, I think the thing that struck me the most was Rose's emphasis on individual responsibility. This idea that we all have a choice in how we participate in the world.
Oh, absolutely. He's really big on that. He says we can choose to be cogs in the machine, or we can choose to be architects of something new.
So if you're feeling trapped, if you're tired of choosing between bad and worse, Rose's message is pretty clear. Don't just accept the limited choices that the system gives you. Question the system itself.
Challenge the assumptions, explore alternatives, and don't be afraid to create something better. And it all starts with each of us, making conscious choices in our own lives, choices that are aligned with our values and that move us closer to the world we want to see.
Wow, that's really powerful. This deep dive has given me so much to think about. It's really changed my perspective on, well, not just politics, but life in general.
Me too. It's a real eye-opener. And it makes you realize that we have more power than we think we do.
It's a great reminder that we don't have to settle for the status quo, that we can actually shape our own reality. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up.
Yeah, I think we've given everyone plenty to chew on for today.
This deep dive was all about questioning the illusion of choice, about realizing that we often have more options than we think we do. So if you're feeling stuck in any area of your life, whether it's politics, your career, your relationships, whatever, remember Rose's message.
Don't just pick the lesser evil. Question the whole system, challenge the assumptions, and be bold enough to create something better.
It all starts with each of us. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. It's interesting to think about how these ideas, this whole lesser evil thing, it's not just about politics, is it?
No, not at all.
It's like we get so used to choosing between bad and worse in so many areas of life, like we forget that there might be another option altogether.
Right. It's like we get stuck in that mindset.
Right. So how do we apply this reject the system thinking to everyday life. I mean, sometimes it feels kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, it can be. But I think the first step is just becoming aware of it, Like noticing when we feel pressured to choose between things we don't really want.
So like when you're scrolling through Netflix and there's like a million shows, but nothing really grabs you, but you end up watching something anyway just because you feel like you have to.
Exactly. Or like when you stay in a job that's making you miserable, but you're too scared to quit and try something new.
Or even the way we consume information. It's like, are we just passively taking in whatever's fed to us? Or are we actively seeking out different perspectives, questioning things?
It's about being more conscious, more deliberate about the choices we make.
Instead of just going with the flow, going with the default.
Yeah. Because Rose's whole point is that we always have a choice, even if the options in front of us seem limited or sucky.
Okay, but awareness is one thing. How do we actually break free from those crappy choices, those limited choices?
Well, it takes courage, right?
For sure.
And creativity. And a willingness to get uncomfortable. We might need to have tough conversations. Or take risks. Or walk away from something that's no longer working for us.
So it's about reclaiming our power, basically.
Yeah.
Designing the lives we want instead of settling for whatever the system throws at us.
Exactly.
So if you're feeling stuck, if you're tired of choosing between the lesser of two evils, remember what Larken Rose says. Don't just accept those limited choices. Question the whole system.
Challenge the assumptions, explore the alternatives, and don't be afraid to create something better.
Because it all starts with us, right? Each of us making choices that align with our values, with what we truly believe in.
Yeah, absolutely. Taking responsibility for our own lives and building a world where real freedom can actually exist.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about. Hopefully it's inspired you to question the systems you encounter in your own life
Yeah.
and to challenge those assumptions you've been holding on to. And most importantly, to explore all the possibilities that exist beyond that illusion of choice.
That's what it's all about.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.